This charge goes all the way back to Abraham, who we mentioned in the opening message this morning. God explained to Abraham this very idea of blessing and blessed, of joy and joyful. The idea that if you do good, you get good. God instructed Abraham that if you're obedient, if you bless others, you too will be blessed. Bless and be blessed. Our gospel lesson this morning is the beginning of what Matthew refers to as the Sermon on the Mount. Luke, however, calls it the Sermon on the Plain. There are a couple of interesting notes, I think, about this part of the Gospels. First, Matthew groups the Sermon on the Mount together. We read the Beatitudes this morning, of which there are 9. And it follows in the next 2 chapters of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount. And all of the lessons are there in a nice sequence. Luke doesn't do that. Luke separates those lessons in the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain throughout his Gospel. They're broken up over a number of chapters in different places. Same ideas, different location. Luke has Beatitudes too. Matthew had how many? How many did Matthew have that we just read? 9. See, everyone says, oh, we know the Beatitudes. We're very familiar with it. When someone says the Beatitudes, we go, oh yeah. But we don't know how many there are. Very often there's 9 in Matthew 9. In Luke, there are 4. Take a look sometime. I believe it's in the 6th chapter of Luke. And see which 4 he was chosen. I find that an interesting theological question, which I am not going to delve into today. What I find interesting is the structure. That it's broken up in Luke and it's put together in Matthew, all in a sequence. And in Matthew, he says that when the crowds gathered, Jesus went up to the mountain. And then he sat down. And then he began to speak. And then he taught them. It was a process. Now, in Jewish custom, when a rabbi speaks, he often teaches standing up. He'll walk around and teach you something. But when a rabbi sits, that's serious business. That's when you really sit up straight and pay attention. Those are real deep life lessons. And it says that Jesus sat. They called him teacher, rabbi. That was his place. He sat, and then he spoke, and then he taught. I believe that the Sermon on the Mount, if you go through the 2 chapters of Matthew and really look at them, is not one single sitting. That would have been a lot to take in. I believe that Luke probably has it a little better in terms of his layout. It's broken up over the course of Jesus' ministry. I believe that because these are the things that are the core. The Beatitudes, what we just read this morning, are the core of Jesus' teaching. The heart of the matter is right there. I believe these are things that the disciples came to know by heart, not through one simple sitting. It's given reverence in its structure where Jesus sits, and then he speaks, and then he teaches them. There's a process. They learn these things together over time by living with and communicating with and listening to their master. The Beatitudes are the core of Jesus' teaching. They are a series of blessings about which Jesus is instructing the disciples. In Matthew, Jesus lays out 9 types of blessings. First, he notes that the poor in spirit are blessed. The poor in spirit. I've often heard preachers relate this to poverty of some kind, poor, right? And go into this big long thing about poor and rich and this and that and dividing people against other people. I don't think that's what Jesus did. So I don't think when they're talking about the poor in spirit, that's what they're talking about. The poor in spirit are people who realize that life is tough. Life is tough. And that all that we encounter, all that we do, all that we experience, we cannot really and truly bear alone. We cannot live without God. The poor in spirit are people who call upon God for aid and assurance, for affirmation and strength. And theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? The kingdom of heaven. Is that a promise of something to come? Life in eternity? Well, yes and no. I think Jesus was a fairly practical fellow. I believe that what that means for those who cry out for the aid of God, who seek Him and desire His help. We know that when we call on God, we receive that aid, don't we? We call on Him every day. We know that when one calls, God responds. Right there, in that moment, the kingdom of heaven. God is with those people. They seek Him. He responds. Not sometime in the future, but right now. Here. In this world. In this life. Those who mourn are blessed. I have no doubt, from personal experience, that those who experience grief are comforted by their faith. I know that to be true. I think mourning has a deeper meaning here also. The theme of Jesus' ministry was, in no small part, repentance. Those who mourn are people who understand and who seek to relieve themselves from the burden of their own sins. Those who mourn truly understand the value of repentance. These people desire to move beyond the sins of their lives